All right. So this is project one, let's say part three, compositing. Um, and the one thing I would really encourage, particularly with this aspect of the project, is that you really experiment, that you try different things, different images. This is essentially collage. And you can think about it in a really straightforward way, like just placing yourself on a different background. But that's, of course, what's expected. And it'd be good, really, to push yourself, not go with maybe the first solution, or, you know, as I do often, throw a bunch of things into a file, have kind of a loose idea, and see if you can make it work. I do. I have a loose idea. First of all, I have two images that I just took. One's underneath the other. I may or may not use that. And then I've got another image that I may or may not use. This image I probably will. A grunge image for texture that may go over top. I've got this that I'm thinking about, and I've got this that I'm thinking about. Whether these will all fit together in the same thing, I don't know. But, you give yourself some adventure. Don't have it all worked out beforehand and see if you can figure out a way to get there. Have maybe a visual idea, but let it be an adventure. Okay? Now, the first thing I know I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to combine two images at the start and try and do that in a way that integrates the two images, which I've talked about a lot. And one of the keys to that is basically fairly simple. It's just working with a mask. And again, a mask is basically painting in transparency or opacity on a separate part of the layer that essentially is a pixel map. And you're painting in whether pixels are, opaque or transparent. Well, there's shortcuts to doing certain kinds of things. And let's look at one of those. So, what I want to do first is I'm going to paste an image in, and I want it to kind of integrate with my face in a way that really the images do kind of combine, affect each other. And so I'm going to take certain aspects of my face, that being the shadows, and paste the image into the shadows, basically over the whole image. So there's a really good way of doing that under select. Select color range. You can do this with a color or a value or both. And I'm going to select in a shadow area like here. Fuzziness is just like tolerance. If you go all the way down, you're just going to get pixels that are essentially exactly like the one you clicked on. The further up you go, the more pixels you're going to get selected. And eventually that's going to be a pretty wide range. So I want enough of my face there still that this makes sense. And again, you can experiment with the fuzziness. Essentially, what this is, the white means that's where you're going to have pixels selected. The black means pixels won't be selected there. Okay? And grays in between mean exactly what you would infer. This is just like translating something on a mask. The grays are levels of opacity. So a gray pixel on here that's 50% gray would be 50% opacity. And so your selection is not pixels that are all or nothing. Some pixels are going to be selected 50%. So whatever you do with that selection, that's how it's going to work. You have 50% opacity on those grays. Okay, so I have sampled colors, do the selection. This is what the selection looks like. Now, a lot of these areas that you see selected, there's going to be pixels in there that aren't, like I said, aren't 100%. They're maybe 50%, whatever. So whatever you do, with this selection, you want to keep that in mind. You can also, keep in mind under select that there's something called modify. You can smooth your boundaries. You can expand them by a certain number of pixels, contract them by a certain number of pixels. And you can also feather, which sometimes comes in handy for transitions. Feathering, you can specify how many pixels, and instead of just going from 100% opacity to 100% transparency, a selection can work over a number of pixels so that, you go from 0 to 100 over maybe 5 pixels instead of just 2. Okay? So I'm not going to use that here, but now when you use this selection to combine another image, what we're doing essentially is using this selection to paste another image in only where the selection is. Got that? So what happens is when you do that, if this is where the paste into is going to show up, in this selection area, it won't show up over here. Now, how does Photoshop accomplish that? Well, I've mentioned before, selections, masks, and channels are essentially all the same thing. This essentially, and what you just said when we were doing the select by color range, what you just saw, that white to black range, is just like a mask. And so that's what's going to be reproduced, actually, when I paste an image into this selection. It's going to create another layer for that image, which will have that image on it as a whole. And then it'll create a mask which dictates where the pixels of that image will be 100%, where they'll be 50%, and where there'll be 0% opacity. Okay? So let's go to that image that I'm going to use. Not this one, this one. You want to make sure it's big enough, for the area that you want to cover, obviously, right? And I'm just going to do a select all or Command A. And then edit, copy, or Command C. Let's go back to our original image. Now I'm pasting into an existing selection. Selections are independent of layers. So this is going to create a new layer because I'm doing a paste. I go to Edit, Paste, Special. Don't just do a paste because you'll just get the whole image. You got to do a paste special and paste into. And voila. That's what we get. And look closely, here's the mask. Okay? Here's the mask. And so there's the image of that old warehouse. And not only does it create a mask, and you can see where some of these pixels are not 100%. There's places where they're 50%, 25%, whatever. So not only does it create a mask for you, but that mask is there for you to work on further. And that's really key to developing an idea, thinking about what do I do at this point, where do I go? Okay. Now, one of the things that I'm looking at right now is, okay, how do I feel about how that mask came in and combined with the face? Does it have enough interaction? What would happen if my selection was a little bit smaller? So I'm going to dump this layer, right? I'm going to dump the new layer, go back to select my color range, okay? And this time the fuzziness is where it was, 64. I'm going to lower the fuzziness a little bit. Click OK. See how that looks, right? Go back to Edit. And again, think about what's happening here, because you don't want to just follow my commands. Think about what's actually happening. First, you need to understand what a mask does. It selects pixels basically on the basis of opacity and transparency. Black is transparency, white is opacity, and you have all the grays in between. And so a mask assigns black, white, everything in between to every pixel to dictate its opacity / transparency. And you can work on a mask with any painting tool. You can, use selections to create masks like this and so on. So let's see how this looks when we do the same thing. Okay. So I'm gonna go back to this image again. This should still be on the clipboard, so I don't need to do a select on copy again. Okay. So what are we gonna do here? Paste special. Paste into, because that's essentially what we're doing, is pasting into. And let's see how it looks this time. Okay. There's a little bit more interaction there. I'm seeing a little bit more of the face here and there and with the glasses. So I kind of like this a little bit better. Remember also that, this is an active mask that you can work on and do more. Now, there's a lot of things that I might do to change this through the course of working on it. But right now, I want to make sure I'm on the image, and let's look at just what blending modes do. Particularly in terms of color, maybe I want some color in there. And so I might use a blending mode throughout, so that I get some color, a little bit more evenness. Again, a little bit more exchange. Vivid light, color dodge works. Vivid light, for what I'm looking for, having some color, maybe overlay, although the image is a little bit dim. We'll go with vivid light for now, okay? And that might change. And you can also actually change the opacity. So, that can change the dynamics also. Very much so. Now what I'm going to do is go into the mask. Let's say this image, I want to maybe experiment and do more. What I'm going to do is take the paintbrush. I want to switch these foreground and background colors so that I'm working with black. All right. And then in terms of a brush, let's see, I want to work with actually a fairly simple brush. I don't want something that's like a charcoal pencil or anything like that, really. I want it to be fairly soft. We'll make the size a little bit larger. You can give it, try something with rough edges if that's something that you're looking for, or without. Totally up to you what you're looking for. Hardness is 0 because I want a pretty soft brush. Okay, remember, I'm working with black, which is basically I want to paint transparency into essentially, it feels like I'm working on the portrait layer, but I'm not. I'm working on the layer on top of that. Okay? So, if I painted black right now in any part of this, it would take away from that warehouse layer that I just pasted into and show what's underneath, which is the image of myself. On the other hand, if I use white, it's going to bring out more of this image. And let's check our opacity. I'm going to put that at 100. Flow, I'm going to put that at 100. And we won't worry about the brush angle or anything. And just so you can see, again, this is another image. Okay, if on layer, this is layer 1 for some reason, yeah, it's the first layer. Okay, so this is layer one. Now, just so you can see everything that's there, you can go to layer, and while you're on layer one, just try disabling the mask that you just pasted in. So you see what the whole image looks like at this point, combining the two things. There it is. There's the entire thing. Okay? So that gives you an idea where you are, right? And, if you need to at this point, because they're not linked, you can move that layer a little bit. I kind of like the writing, but, maybe I could leave it like that and it kind of makes sense, right? Go back to the mask, just click on it, turns it back on. All right. So if I want to reveal more of that layer that I kind of liked, I'm going to create more opacity on this mask. That means working with white. So I'm going to take this brush. Let's make it a little bit larger. And let's just go into here. And again, because we've got a blending mode working, you still have a bit of the image underneath coming through. The image of myself, because we're using a blending mode that has some translucency to it. And again, blending modes, of course, remain flexible. So you can try a lot of different blending modes even after you've gone a certain distance in terms of working on this. As the kind of process that we're working on, now I'm going to take another image. Let's try this one. I did already colorize it. I changed the mode from grayscale to RGB, then went to adjustments, hue saturation. Hit the colorize button to get a little bit of color to it. Now, let's select the part of it kind of I'm most interested in. Command C, copy. All right. And now we'll paste. There we go. Okay. So it's kind of interesting, but how does it work in all of this, especially with two people there, so on and so forth? There's things that I like, but things maybe that are kind of in the way. I'm going to use a mask again. And in this case, starting with a white mask, I could add black to it to kind of take out what I don't want. One quick way that may be a solution is to take the gradient tool, use a radial gradient, radial meaning circular, and try putting a gradient in. And again, like I said before, you can use any kind of paint tool, right? Any kind of paint tool on a mask. So if I do a gradient that is, and let's go to the very first one here. Now it's white to black. Let's go back to that real quick. White to black, gradient. So that means white in the center to black on the outside, which is transparent. So if I go click here, drag out to black. So where I go to black from the center, that is now going to be transparent. White to black. Again, you see the gradient there. And again, it's just another type of painting tool. Think of it that way. It's a gradient. I want to see if I can align that tubular thing with my glasses, and it kind of aligns there, you know. Here is another image I was interested in using. Before I do anything, let's look at mode. It is grayscale. I'm going to change that to RGB now. And then, as I just talked about, go to hue saturation. And I'm just going to colorize. And because I mainly want the sky from this, so I'm gonna push it in that direction, blue. And I might even do another adjustment here for contrast. And let's push up the contrast. Okay. And we'll do a selection with the marquee. And Command C, copy. We'll go here, and again, I don't intend to use the whole image, but let's see how it fits in, if it fits in at all. You want to take chances, try things. There's really no penalty to trying something here, and that's how you get better and better at kind of combining images and seeing what works. So let's do a command paste, and let's try first of all to see what we have by maybe using a blending mode and taking the opacity down. One thing we do have a choice of doing is maybe transforming the size. We can go to edit, transform, scale, and scale that down just a bit. Right here maybe. Now the clouds are over here. They'd be a little bit easier to see. Maybe if they were on the other side. I'm going to scale this down a little bit more. And then what I'm going to do is double click. Let's go to transform again. Transform. And I'm going to flip it horizontally. In other words, I see the clouds here. I'd rather have them on this side where they'd show a little bit better. So I'm going to transform, flip horizontal. Okay. Now that's a little bit better. It gives me a little bit of color. But I don't really want the Wright Brothers glider in there. I kind of just want the clouds. So we're going to do another gradation on a mask. Go to layer, layer mask, Reveal all will be a white mask. Then this time we are going to use gradient again, but this time it's a linear gradient, the first one. And right now it's white to black. So if I want to do white to black, get most of the clouds, that's where I have 100% opacity, where the gradation starts. Where it ends, it'll be 100% transparent. Boom. So again, I used a gradient on a layer mask, which is just another painting tool, to create a gradient that gave me a smooth transition from opacity to transparency on that layer, giving me what I wanted out of the layer, getting rid of what I didn't. Sometimes you can get that out of a gradation, sometimes you can't. Now I can push up the color a little bit more. But I'd say this still doesn't quite come together, even though some of the imagery starts to. In my mind, I've kind of been aware of the fact that all along I'm going to put a pretty heavy texture over all of this to help integrate everything. And that's where textures like this come in. And lots of vintage photo, grunge textures, all kinds of things are there for people who work in Photoshop. You can find high-res textures all over the internet. So let's first change the image or make sure it's RGB mode. Then we're going to go into adjustments again. Hue saturation, which I use a lot. Colorize. We might even push up saturation a little bit. And click OK. And this is a type of thing that if it isn't quite the right size, we can probably scale it up or down a little. It's close, but it might be a little bit small. So I'm going to do a select all and copy, Command C. And let's go to this image here and paste. Okay, so we can see it is a little bit small. Ideally, we'd want something that's large enough, but I'm going to free transform this since it is kind of abstract. Somewhat abstract. And in this context, without anything too recognizable, that percentage of scaling up should work. Now it's just a matter of what blending mode and opacity might work to kind of pull things together. Where I'm at this stage and I want a particular thing to come through to get the focus a little bit stronger, what I might try doing is just duplicating a layer. What do I want to kind of project a little bit more? Duplicate that layer, bring it to the top, play with the transparency and blending mode. Why? Because that's the thing I want to come through a little bit more strongly. Think everything integrates at this point. So I'm going to duplicate the image of myself, right? Bring it up to the top. Remember that? And just try some of the blending modes. So let's push the opacity up a little bit. It's not the best photograph in the first place. But keep in mind how I used masks. Use masks in three different ways on three different layers. Remember getting a selection, doing a paste into, using gradations. Any of the masks that I still have at this point, could still go back into them. And keep in mind those masks are very flexible.